You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. If you spend any time on social media, there's no doubt that you've probably seen a bunch of posts and videos offering to decode your love life. These posts often promise to explain why you're drawn to certain people, or why you keep ending up in relationships with partners who aren't any good for you. The internet really has no shortage of armchair theories on the psychology of desire and attraction, from sayings like freak in the head, freak in the bed, to videos explaining the crazy hot matrix, to countless memes about so-called daddy issues. But is there any truth to this stuff? I mean, are we really drawn to psychopaths? Is mental illness something that people actually find to be sexy? And do people with attachment wounds really make for better lovers? In this episode, we're breaking down some of the biggest myths about sex and relationships that dominate social media, exploring where they come from and what the data actually say about them. As you'll see, understanding love and attraction usually necessitates more than just a good meme. I am joined once again by Joe Nucci, a licensed psychotherapist, writer, and social media influencer. His content contextualizes mental health misinformation, pop psychology facts and fallacies, and culturally misconstrued ideas. Joe's work focuses on empowering individuals, whether they have a background in psychology or not, so that they can live life with a greater sense of agency and self-awareness. His debut book, Psychobabble, is available wherever books are sold. This is going to be another fascinating conversation. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Many couples tend to drift apart over time, but it's rarely because of one big fight. It's about life getting busy, distractions piling up, and slowly losing that close connection that you cherished and that seemed to come so effortlessly in the honeymoon phase. This is why somewhere between 30 and 40% of first marriages end in divorce. It's usually not from a lack of love, but from a lack of intentional connection. However, it doesn't have to be this way, and that's where Paired comes in, the #1 couples app that helps to improve your relationship and that takes just minutes each day. Curated by relationship therapists, Paired uses expert-backed research to support making a lasting impact for couples. Here's how it works. You and your partner download the app and pair together. Every day, Paired sends you a 5-minute game, quiz, or question designed to deepen your relationship. Answer on your own time, and once you're done, Paired will reveal your partner's response so that you can have an open, stress-free, and honest conversation. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I love the games on this app. For example, there's one about your sexual bucket list that encourages you to share some of the things that you've always wanted to try in bed, but haven't done yet. This is such a great way to learn about each other's wants and desires and to find your common ground. I found exercises like this to be so useful in my own life because turning conversations about delicate topics like this into a game just makes it feel easy and fun instead of stressful. Practice making your relationship a priority every day with Paired. Head to paired.com/Justin to get a 7-day free trial and 25% off if you sign up for a subscription. That's paired.com/Justin to sign up today. Okay, Joe, let's talk about some popular sex and relationship myths. So I want to start with this common saying that you mentioned in the book, which is freak in the head, freak in the bed. Right. And the idea behind this is that people who are mentally unstable make for the wildest sex partners. And that was the inspiration for something a lot of people on social media refer to as the crazy hot matrix, right? For example, right before the show, I was checking out this YouTube video that had millions of views that was talking all about this idea with respect to men's attraction to women, and that there's this sort of combination of like as hotness and craziness both go up, sex gets milder, more intense. But there's also the same idea out there with respect to women's attraction to men. And there's actually quite a bit of research that backs it up in the sense that, for example, people do indeed report more attraction to persons with psychopathic and other dark triad traits. So let's start there. As a therapist, what can you tell us about why some people might be drawn to partners who have psychopathic characteristics?
Justin, I'm so excited to talk about this one with you because I couldn't not include this in the book because, this is a mental health myth, if you will, that I've heard since middle school in the locker room, and like adolescent boys cracking jokes and, pretending we have more experience than, any of us probably had at the time. And I thought long and hard and deeply about this. And I think that let's start first with the dark triad traits. I had a patient, I write about this in the book, who believes that they briefly like dated / like hooked up with someone who was something like a psychopath. And I don't mean like, oh, like that investment banker was such a psycho. Like we kind of use this term in a colloquial way. I mean like antisocial personality disorder. Like we think that there were like deficits in like, not just deficits, but like an absence of like empathy and shame and guilt. And one of the things that they described that I thought was so fascinating was that they described how their sexual interests were perfectly aligned. This particular patient was a very sexual person, like did a lot of like work on themselves in this domain, was very open-minded, etc. And I remember after they had stopped seeing each other, we were processing it, and we thought that was a little weird. Like 90% sure, but 100? There was nothing else. And one of the conclusions we came to is this idea where it's like, well, did this person actually have like a sense of self? For those listening and watching, if you don't know, one of the ways to understand a narcissist or a psychopath is that they don't actually have a very stable sense of self because they're wired so differently. And so one of the things they rely on, like a narcissist is going to rely on the supply from other people, the admiration from other people. A psychopath's, dopamine systems are essentially going to light up when they successfully manipulate other people, is like the simple explanation of how it works. And so when it comes to sex, I understand how sex with somebody like that must be incredibly intoxicating, but it is intoxicating simply because this is the kind of person who doesn't just want to manipulate you through sex, but actually, I would imagine, gets aroused by the prospect of really being able to like manipulate you, keep you high on your own body chemistry, and in a lot of ways, I would say exercise undue influence on you. Another patient who's a survivor of emotional abuse dated someone, but certainly I don't know if they were a full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, but probably narcissistic features at the very least. And they noticed that there was always conversations about decisions in the relationship or about life right after the most intense sex. And they had kind of picked up on this pattern of like the partner would always try something new and wild and intense with them. And then it was kind of when they're flooded with all these feel good and trust hormones, they would kind of make moves on them. It's very icky. It's very, very gross. I can't even imagine trying to do that, let alone being able to like perform like bodily. I want to pause there, but I think that's like the first thing that I think is kind of interesting about this attraction that people have to these traits. And well, let me just say the attraction to the traits doesn't surprise me because people with these traits are usually charismatic. They can often be very like successful. So like it actually makes sense, but it was like specifically, I think like the sexual relationship, it's a topic that's not talked about enough that I think needs to be. What do you think about all that? What do you know about sexuality with these clusters?
Yeah. So I think part of what's going on here is exactly what you said about these individuals often seeming more charismatic. And I think that's especially true when you don't know them very well. Like a narcissist, for example, when you first meet them, can come across as being very confident and talkative and successful. But the more that you get to know them, you might start to recognize deeper levels of their narcissism, right? So I think we can easily confuse these things with other positive traits that then kind of facilitates an attraction. And one of the things that can be dangerous about this is that if you're somebody who is prone to falling in love fast, easily, and often, if you're somebody who has what we refer to as emophilia, you're an individual who is especially susceptible to falling for somebody who has those dark triad traits because you're not giving yourself enough time to kind of fully flesh out their character and see who they are before you develop a deeper attachment to them, right? So I think on a broader level, people do often tend to be attracted to individuals with some of these darker traits. Many of us are able to kind of suss that out before we get too far down the well with that. But there are some people who just seem to be especially prone to kind of falling for them quickly because they're people who are in love with the idea of being in love.
Oh, totally. When I've worked with people who are trying to process the experience of like narcissistic abuse or just general like emotional abuse, one of the things I say to them is because people will often think that there's something like, quote unquote, like wrong with them. And what I often say to people is I'm like, listen, like these people are they're love bombing everyone. Like they're like,
Mhm.
you are just the one that let them in. So they double down on it. I'm not actually familiar with her. You said it's emophilia, amophilia?
Yep.
I would be curious to hear from you, like what the difference between that is someone who's just kind of like a bleeding heart romantic type, or like versus like where does it become like dysfunction? Is it like around like lack of insight, or where that line really is? Because I think that anyone can fall prey to it, right? But I would love to give the people listening who feel like they maybe have like a touch of that, some guidance or just like some insight. Where do you draw the line? Like where does that label become appropriate?
There's actually like a scientifically validated measure that they use
Oh,
to
amazing.
assess this. And it's also correlated, not surprisingly, with things like attachment style, right? Where people who tend to be higher on hemophilia also tend to be a little bit more in the realm of anxious attachment, often are prone to attach a little bit more quickly and then want a lot of reassurance and validation and so forth. But it's kind of a newer term and a newer concept, but I think it does resonate with a lot of people because for many, that is their experience, where they just do tend to attach very, very quickly. And that can lead to more intense and exciting and passionate relationships. But there is that flip side of that you might wind up in a relationship with somebody who's not a good match for you without fully vetting it first.
I'm captivated by the term because I know that I've described myself as someone who is romantic, love sex, but I've always attributed actually like culturally, like American, but I have a lot of like Italian and Hispanic ancestry. And like those cultures are cultures that are very like passionate.
Yeah.
You know, I remember I was talking to somebody who had gotten back, I was much younger, they'd gotten back from their birthright in Israel, and they had like a fling with like an Israeli man. And I remember she was saying that I guess he would like say things to her like, I feel my heart crumbling for you. Like he was very like colorful with his language, and he was very direct. And she said to him, you know, like in the States, people are going to think that you're trying to like manipulate me. And I guess his retort to her was like, well, that's because Americans are closed off to their emotions and are very cold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and so I think that's part of it too, right? Like I have to think about like the cultural piece of it, like as well, where it's kind of like as it comes to kind of understanding this as a construct. Because I thought that was, I mean, I don't know the specifics of that man or whatever happened with all of that, but I thought that was a very funny retort because that's not my first time hearing that about American culture.
I actually just heard the same thing last month when I was away teaching a study abroad course in Spain. One of our guest speakers was talking about how she decided to move to Spain from the States specifically because she liked being in a culture where people were actually open about their emotions and feelings and weren't walled off the way that people in the US and the UK are. And that also ties in with our conversation in the last episode about love bombing. And that would suggest that there's probably going to be some big cross-cultural differences in terms of what people would label or describe as love bombing, or what does it mean to move too fast or too slow, or what is a red flag or what isn't in a relationship.
Totally. I do want to get back to the this question of freak in the head, freak in the bed, though, because we talked about dark triad. One of the other things I write about in the book is there's this idea that maybe because somebody has a mental illness, that makes the sex like more interesting or better somehow. And I've thought a lot about this. What I find kind of interesting about it, just like as like a belief that's out in culture, is a lot of my patients who are struggling with anxiety or depression or OCD or like whatever it is, like they actually like have a lot of sexual problems. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is often the case that like somebody comes in with some sort of like an attachment issue or a diagnosable fill in the blank. And they're like, oh, like, and my sex life is super satisfying. Like I'm having like really healthy, satisfying sex all the time with my partner or whatever it is. It's just like not what I hear, especially, you know, people who are depressed, they experience a lot of anhedonia. They're not just like interested in pleasure. And so I don't really know like where it comes from. One of my theories is that people with like an abandonment wound, if you will, like not to sound too new agey about it, but like, you know, if there's like a mommy issue or a daddy issue, like maybe that makes the person want to like please their sexual partner more. And like maybe that's where the myth comes from. But then, and I feel like you'll agree with this, but then I'm kind of like, yeah, but a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy being takers in bed. Some people do, but some people actually like giving pleasure and like being a real giver. And it doesn't necessarily come from a place of like keeping the relationship stable or something. So I don't know. I mean, this is why I titled the book Psychobabble. It becomes so dizzying when you try to figure out the answer.
Oh, yeah. And, a term like daddy issues. What does that even mean? And does everybody who has like an attachment wound with a parent have the same later outcome in terms of how that's going to affect their adult intimate life and relationships? Absolutely not. Everybody's going to be different, but, it's kind of an oversimplification in that way. Low libido is something that a ton of people struggle with. So it's not surprising that there are lots of supplements on the market offering to give yours a boost. But let's be honest, finding one that actually lives up to the hype is tough because this market is full of products that contain questionable ingredients, are underdosed, or that just don't work, which is why I was excited to discover Drive Boost by VV Health. VV Health is in the business of trust and transparency. Their libido supplement is doctor-formulated, rigorously third-party tested for purity and potency, and it's made right here in the USA. Drive Boost is also unique because it's formulated for men and women alike. So if you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a libido supplement that's actually effective and that you can feel confident about, it's time to check out Drive Boost. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. Something that I was thinking about as I was reading this section in your book was that, yes, there is this association people seem to hold between the crazy hot matrix or the freak in the head, freak in the bed. But I don't think it's that people are attracted to mental illness per se. Rather, I think sometimes they're attracted to some symptom or expression of a mental illness that manifests as sexual eagerness. And I think that's really what it is, because if you think about somebody who is bipolar, who's in a manic state, there's often, these very high levels of sexual behavior. Also, for somebody who's depressed, what we see in the research is that depression has two effects on sexuality. For most people, it's going to tend to depress it, right? And they're not going to be interested in sex as much or have as much desire. But then there are other people who are depressed who turn to sex as a emotion regulation system, a way of coping with their depression. And so they actually engage in more sex and more risky sexual behavior because they're just trying to feel something. And, that can happen too with people with anxiety disorders where sex becomes this coping mechanism. And so in all these cases, you've got high sexual eagerness. They might be having a lot of sex. It doesn't necessarily mean they're having healthy sex, but I think it's just that eagerness that's what people are perceiving here.
Oh, interesting. So maybe it's if you're eager to engage sexually because you're using sex as a coping tool or some sort of compensatory mechanism, an emotional regulation tool, etc. Maybe that's what people think is appealing about that. Do you know, is there in the literature, is there a gender difference? Because I know that in depression, Terry Real or someone has really popularized this idea that when you're assessing men, actually look for substance issues, anger, there's a few other ones. I wonder that if you found one or the other, or if the research has found one or the other in terms of using sex.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the work that I've seen, it can happen to people regardless of, their gender or their sexual orientation. My recollection, I could be wrong, I need to go back to the data, is that it's a little bit more common for men to kind of turn to sex as a coping mechanism in this way. But, it's something that can happen across genders.
Totally. That's super interesting. Yeah, you can think about that for a long time. I know that one of the other things I talk about in the book is that, when it comes to men speaking about women in this way, is that there is a certain misogynistic element to it when the idea is that oh, she's sexy because she's mentally ill because it's easier to control someone with a mental illness. And when I say mental illness, I'm not necessarily referring to intellectual disability or something like that. But the idea is that you'll be able to be more emotionally manipulated, more easily emotionally manipulated. And I think I definitely think some people hold that belief. And it's not even just because I'm gay. It's just I have a hard time relating to that mindset. But I think that that's another one that's worth just double clicking on to just keep, I don't want to make people paranoid or whatever. That's not my intention at all. But I do think it's worthy of consideration.
Yeah. And I think that there is a dark side to all of this, where there are people who specifically look for individuals who are maybe a little mentally unstable or who are wounded individuals because they do think that they're easier to manipulate, and they might lead them on in terms of telling them that they're, interested in more, but they're not really interested in that. They just want like a casual opportunity to keep open, and they know that they can kind of string this person along more. And I think that's ultimately really damaging for that person who is either wounded or has a mental health issue, when they then end up getting abused in that way, and it can make the mental health issues worse. And it just creates this cycle where it's not really good for anyone.
I have a question for you about that. So I understand how someone might intentionally manipulate another person who has a mental illness or has some like emotional instabilities by like kind of like love bombing them, like in a loose sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also observed in terms of just like looking at like hookup culture, and I've certainly been on the receiving end of this myself. And if I'm being honest, I've probably accidentally done this, but there's also like there's like an erotic template, like there's like a seduction style that's like very like romantic in a certain sense. And my hypothesis, tell me what you think about this, is that this is how some people just like get turned on. And this is just like how they have it. Like this is kind of where like the joke of like post-nut clarity comes from, where it's like, oh, then afterwards it's like, oh, I'm actually not like that interested in you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's necessarily always intentional. I think that for some people, it's just how they get into it. It's how they turn themselves on. And I think it's actually kind of interesting, going back to our love bombing conversation that we had in the last episode. It's just kind of interesting to think about, like, are they a love bomber, or is their erotic template just really like traditional and vanilla? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is that like, I don't know if that's like a fair characterization, but it's just something I've noticed.
Yeah. And I think there is something to that. And with all of these things, where there's some element of perceived manipulation, well, it could be that somebody is intentionally manipulating somebody else, or there could be something else that's going on here. I don't think that it's always intentional when these kinds of things happen, but it just highlights how all of these issues with sex and relationships are complex.
Yeah, totally.
So how do you want people to think about this idea of freak in the head, freak in the bed going forward? What should we be talking about here instead?
I want people to normalize the idea that mental health is actually very sexy.
Mm-hmm.
Just as someone who takes really good care of their body is going to be physically attractive, someone who takes really good care of their mind and heart is going to be a whole different kind of attractive. And there is literature to show this, right? Like, people actually have like better sex like as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the data accounts for this, but I imagine like part of that is it's hard to get older and never work on yourself. Like, maybe you never go to therapy, but it's like life humbles you. You know what I mean? Like, life,
Mm-hmm.
very least like changes you and gives you perspective. And I think that there's something so sexy about knowing yourself, like knowing what turns you on, like owning it. I mean, that takes vulnerability, authenticity, self-awareness, all these things that you can hope to gain from therapy. I think that's what I want to normalize. The myth is that, well, mental illness is sexy. And I think that that's akin to the myth that, like, sometimes artists and creatives have this myth where it's like, well, I can only produce good work if I'm really miserable.
Right.
I love how you just rolled your eyes at that, because I feel the same way. I mean, I have fallen prey to that way of thinking at one time in my life. And, I'm not a religious person at all, but I do believe that little voice telling you that, like, if you want to be happy, like, you can't also be successful or like produce great art or have great sex. I think that is existence of the devil. Like, I really do. Like, that little voice in your head, like whispering to you, like, no, like, if you make it to the mountaintop, right, no one else is going to be there to experience joy and pleasure with you. It's like, that is just not true.
Yeah. Like, is Taylor Swift going to have to break up in order to make great music again?
Oh my God. I was actually like thinking of her as I said that. I don't think so. I think that one of the things that she has done so well, so many of her legendary songs, is she is able to write about heartbreak in a way that feels so good. And that's one of the magical things about sad music, is that it feels good to listen to. You know what also feels really good? And I love music. Like, I'm a big like EDM boy, for example. A lot of those lyrics are like very simple, but they're just very positive.
Yeah.
And they're joyful. And I find them equally as relatable. And so I don't know if we're going to be, I mean, now we need to come back on so we can talk about music and mental health, but you want to have room for all of it. And maybe that's another thing I kind of want to leave with people. It's like, there's all different types of sex that you can be having. And people are wired differently, but it's like, yeah, maybe some people, there's like a narrower field of options in how they want to do it. And other people can have all sorts of different types of sex that are healthy and reciprocated.
Yeah. So you said mental health can be sexy, and, that is something that you can work on in therapy. But, that also gets at another myth that you talk about in your book, which is this idea that therapy will make you ready for a relationship. A lot of people look at therapy as kind of like the end all authority on love and sex for that matter too. Like if you just go to therapy, you'll learn everything you need to know and you'll come out ready to go and will be a great partner. But is that really true? Will therapy really make you ready for a relationship?
That's the rumor. And was something I write about in that chapter. I think I open it with something like, I don't know about all the other therapists out there, but I find the journey of love just as exciting and confusing as anybody else. And that is absolutely my authentic truth. I do like to joke with people though, when they ask this question is, so all the therapists in your life, they're just like really good at dating. Like, is that what you've observed? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of like if anything, it's a little bit the opposite. Or like, I don't know, like if you were to like, ask my friends about like my dating history in my 20s and they're like, oh, so, well, Joe was in grad school. Like, did he immediately know things about, relationship or dating? Like they would laugh at your face and they would be right to. What does all this mean? To me, it means that if there is a mental health problem impacting your dating life or relationships, therapy can absolutely help, like for sure, because that's what therapy is there for, treating mental illnesses. When it comes to like self-actualizing and it comes to manifesting your soulmate, having the best sex ever repeatedly, when it comes to all those things, I think that we need to start borrowing from other fields. Number one, I don't think that therapy is the end all be all answer. And I think that ironically, this belief that like, well, I need to be enough of blank to have a successful relationship is what ironically holds a lot of people back from finding love. In this chapter, I talk about Erich Fromm, who's one of my inspirations when it comes to understanding human relationships and love. And in his book, The Art of Loving, he talks about how this idea that like, I will find love if I'm good looking enough, if I'm rich enough, if I'm popular enough, if I'm, et cetera. There's actually this like transactional element of like, I can buy this feeling if I can provide fill in the blank. The myth that therapy will make you ready for a relationship or that it's a necessary prerequisite for a relationship. I think it's giving like mental health meme industrial complex. Like it's giving like, and the thing that I think a lot of people have a really hard time swallowing when I talk about this topic specifically, and people like, they almost don't believe me. It's like, I've treated a wide variety of people in my private practice career thus far. Some of them came to me with like severe mental dysfunction and their relationship was not a topic of conversation. Their partners were simply just supportive and great. They maybe even dropped in for a session, not because they needed couples therapy, but just for like psychoeducation. They found love even while being like, in the most compassionate way, severely mentally ill. And I know that's like hard for people to hear who are like single and like working on themselves. But like, again, we don't have that much control over it. I think that my advice to anyone listening is that therapy can be a wonderful tool, but sometimes there's too much of a good thing. Sometimes all that analysis and self-awareness and processing you can get in your own way. You can try to exert control where you don't have any. And really the best way to be in a relationship is to go practice being in one. You can practice so much in terms of intimacy with your therapist, but it's going to be way different when you have to be that way with your partner, because you know what? Your partner could leave you. Your therapist is going to be there next week, provided that your credit card doesn't get declined. Speaking of mental health industrial complex. But you know what I mean? That's my little rant on that. Like, I just think that we all need to normalize putting ourselves out there a little bit more. And it's hard because that memory of that heartbreak, I know it's so painful. I know mine have been very painful, but it's also going to be painful to be alone for too long. So you might as well go for it.
Well, so what about all these people who put in their dating profiles, I won't date you unless you've gone to therapy, right? Is that also mental health industrial complex?
A bit. I mean, I think that for me, what I often tell people when they're like, Joe, like, how do I deal with all this psychobabble? Like my cousin, my sister, my partner is like, spending too much time on therapy, TikTok, they're using all these words. And my piece of advice is the advantage of our field is that it can make you a more sophisticated person relationally, but you show that sophistication. You don't tell it. And so one of the problems I think with all this psychobabble is that it's like this posturing. It's like, I'm going to tell you how emotionally intelligent I am, but I'm actually coming across the opposite. Mm-hmm. And so if someone has that in their profile, my curiosity is, well, what are they really asking? They're asking for somebody that has tolerance for ambiguity, that has emotional regulation skills, that like has things that you can get from therapy or other means. Or maybe that person's just not a match for you, right? I think that if someone accuses you of gaslighting, the last thing you want to do is start correcting their definition, because you know what? That's a little gaslighty. But what you can do...
It's probably not going to go anywhere.
No, exactly. But like what you can do is you could say like, you can actually just apologize and be like, I want to understand your perspective before giving your own. That doesn't mean give their version of reality all of the benefit of the doubt, because that's actually them gaslighting you, right? Although gaslighting can't happen in a single conversation, technically speaking. But I guess like that's what I want people to take away when it comes to that in the profile or any of these other like buzzwords that we hear. It's just like, listen for what the underneath is and then proceed strategically.
I think that's good advice. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Joe. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
Thank you so much. This was great. So my name is Joe Nucci. That's N as in Nancy, UCCI for those who are listening. Joe Nucci Therapy on all the socials, joenuccitherapy.com, and Psychobabble, Viral Mental Health Myths and the Truths to Set You Free is available wherever books are sold.
Great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.